Um, Hari Om, Shri Guru Pyo Namaha. So Namaste everybody. Once again we are joined by B. Clifford G. And we are continuing on with our series of Vedanta and psychology. And today's topic is going to be the resolution of emotional pain into Ishvara. So BG, please take it away.
Okay. Now, when I went to India, I didn't go to India as a cool, calm, and collected and confident human being, because I've never been a cool, calm, collected, confident human being, and I'm not one now. And what's great is I no longer want to be one of that. But so, and the thing is, I would find myself being enclosed in emotional pain. Whether that pain was boredom, loneliness, emptiness, a feeling of grievance about the world, a feeling of grievance about my past or my worries about the future, worries about myself and what that why am I so stuffed up? So I didn't I didn't come to Swami Dayananda, I was caught in something. I didn't really understand what I was caught in, and I was desperately wanting to find what my problem was. And you see, and I, of course, looked at my problem from my background, from my own background, my own academic background, and because of my psychological studies, I kind of looked at my problem from a psychological perspective, and I was fairly convinced that there was something intrinsically wrong with me. You know what I mean? I had some kind of psychological pathology that I hadn't come to grips with. Does that make sense? So even the way I was looking, I was looking at this problem of suffering from a very what I didn't realize, a subjective perspective. So I was looking at it like what Swami Dayananda says, subjectivity is because I'm seeing it's there. It's not that it's there. So what was happening was when I looked at myself, what would happen would be I would have what was determining that looking was my past conditioning. So there was not the light of wisdom. Psychology looking at psychology, and then my efforts to change myself was more psychology trying to change psychology. So there was not the presence of God obtaining in me as wisdom, as a new way of seeing. And there was partially because I knew enough, I'd read enough of his books, but I was still I didn't understand so much really practically. Does that make sense? Because I was an academic, I was an intellectual, which, and I refer to myself as a recovering intellectual, because I had, funnily enough, even though I was in pain, I had a kind of an intellectual vanity, if you like. Does that make sense? I was a bit impressed with myself in terms of certain things. But however, that what humbled me straight away was because I found Sanskrit impossible to learn for me, for example, right? So that, so much for being that smart. And my God, some of the people in the Gurukulam were very, very smart with that sort of thing. So that was the beginning point, right? Now, so we know that now. One of the recurring themes in my life that I hated was the fact of my helplessness. I'd be feeling the same. I feel helpless towards it. People would say and do things. I felt helpless. People would die. I felt helpless. So I hated the feeling of helplessness. And whenever I even come near helplessness, I would get very, very busy to try and deal with it. Very, very busy to do something about it. Okay, does that make sense? So what happened was that I didn't really understand Swami Dayananda's central thing about what samsara was, and he gave an existential definition of samsara, which he also called becoming, which was this relentless, compulsive effort to search for and find happiness where it's not in the world, through people and things. And basically that means finding happiness through certain types of experiences. So, for example, so it's not a flattering picture being caught up in binding desires, because it's what we're seeking our good by having an experience that we crave for. For example, the craving for social approval, the craving for power, the craving for sensory excitement, the craving for money. There's many things. Like when I was involved with alcohol, for example, I haven't had a drink for 25 years. But when I was caught, I wasn't seeking alcohol. I was seeking the feeling I got when I had alcohol. So it's not the object. What Swami Dayananda was saying was, I was seeking a feeling of inner rightness through an external means. But I didn't even know that, And so you can imagine that my heart and mind were completely caught up in the pursuit of what I considered good, right? So what happens is, we become involved in the world. Now, we're not innocent victims. What's happened is, because we're ignorant of what is truly good, we find ourselves seeking the good away from ourselves. This is, when you look at the metaphysics of Vedanta, we seek objects away from ourselves, right? And so I was a craver. Does that make sense? And all I was trying to do was to make sure that I could get my craving satisfied. My life was that, basically. So, and because how Swami Dayananda says in the Gita home study course that we give our heart away, we give it away to things, we give it away to people. So with my heart, I was caught up in alcohol. And this is a metaphor for every binding desire. I found his psychology just unbelievably extraordinary. Because we're not moved by thinking, we're moved by passion. Right? So I was moved to find alcohol, and so my so-called thinking became, once you're under the spell of a binding desire, your thinking is a function of that binding desire. So I'd go, okay, now what I've got to do? I've got to go home first, but I'll go to the bottle store. I'll have a little small whiskey so my wife doesn't know I'm drinking too much. Then I'll buy my beer, and then I'll go home, right? So that was thinking. Like you could say, well, I'm thinking about the world, and I knew how to think. I knew how to arrive at the bottle shop. I knew how to buy, But the thing was that I was caught in binding desires, right? Now, I didn't realize when I gave up alcohol, I was still caught up in a lot of other forms of addiction, if you like. So my heart and mind was involved in this samsaric pursuit. In fact, my heart and mind was the samsaric pursuit, which was seeking happiness away from or sit where it can't possibly be found. This is this is this is our human condition. We're samsaris, but it doesn't mean that we're an innocent victim, in the sense that the location of being, this existential definition of samsara gives the location of the problem. It is my very seeking of happiness where it's not. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, and what I was always confronted with was this feeling of helplessness, and I thought, if only I could get rid of this feeling of helplessness, I would be fine, right? Then you come across someone like Swami Dayananda, and he says that the basis of prayerfulness is the full and utter acknowledgement of helplessness. In other words, helplessness is a fact to be not only acknowledged but accepted, because there's many things that we're helpless before. Many, many things. And like, for example, our destiny as a psychophysical individual is old age, sickness, and death. We stand helpless before that. We don't like that. So what happens was, and the main thing I was helpless with before was my self-dissatisfaction. I hate being what I'm like. And I wanted to avoid that self-dissatisfaction in any way possible. And I had strategies to avoid it. I wanted to keep away from it because, you see, Western psychology says that we adapt to the environment. Dayananda's psychology, we adapt to fear and self-dissatisfaction. So our psychological structure is a defense against this self-dissatisfaction centered on me. I hate being what I'm like. And we know we're afraid of self-dissatisfaction because have you ever, for example, got upset with someone because they said or did something that you didn't like? You suddenly find yourself feeling something that you really have, and then you move into the attack. Have you ever done that? Yeah, that's just the, would you like to take your mute off?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted.
That's right. So are you familiar with that fact that self-dissatisfaction, we're afraid of it because because we're afraid of it, we move out to deal with it. We, in other words, we continue in this becoming or samsaric activity when we're desperately trying to change someone so we can feel good in ourselves again. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Right. Every human being is, if they're honest, right? Mm-hmm. So what we're looking at is that not only that every moment of our life, every day, this self-dissatisfaction becomes evident. But the moment it becomes evident, we get busy mentally and in terms of action, right? So in terms of thinking and action, we get busy moving outwards to solve it. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's our human life. Now, Swami Dayananda's psychological teaching is all about the psychological transformation that happens in us as an individual in the light of our understanding of God. Okay, so we're not talking about like Western psychology, because Western psychology is godless. Okay, godless. Okay. Now, I'll give you an example of Western psychology. Let's imagine that I have this self-dissatisfaction that I'm not a very good person and I've got no self-approval, right? And then you teach me how to communicate better so that I can be more impressive and and I'm not saying it's not good to learn this, right? But so you teach me some social skills, right? So that I can get the approval of others that I like.
Yes.
Now, that's true. And if you help me improve my communication skills, my social life will be better. And then I can say, well, I've changed.
Yeah.
No, I haven't. I mean, I've added to my function, my repertoire of function. I've got smoother, right? Which I'm not saying is wrong, right? Right? Because you've got to render to Caesar what Caesar's.
Yes.
But I haven't addressed the fundamental problem. I've set up now a way to avoid the experience of me experiencing this ever-present self-dissatisfaction that's always bubbling.
Right.
Are we clear? You clear on that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so, and the thing that I used to think that I had some psychological pathology inside me, you know what I mean, like that needed to get fixed. And then Swami Dayananda gave this series of talks. It was about 2 weeks. It changed my whole life. I've never felt that I'm psychologically stuffed up since. Never. I've never had that burden since.
Okay.
And what he explained was, in a nutshell.
Question. Yeah. Because I would be interested, so would the viewers. since this was part of your 2010 to 13 course, do you remember the name of the series of talks that you're referring to?
No, it was his talks that he gave because he was sick.
Yeah.
What he did was he talked. I had 14 months of him talking about existential themes.
Yeah.
Because he didn't take the formal Upanishadic classes or whatever.
Right.
What he took was he talked about fear and anger and conflict and
Okay.
really juicy stuff for me.
Okay.
Right. So I can't remember where it was. Right?
Okay. So,
now, what he explained was, like, if you're cut off from reality, you can't help but feel alienated. That was his expression. You're alienated from reality.
Yeah.
Implicit in that alienation is self-dissatisfaction. The word implicit in Latin means it's folded in. It's there, but it's folded in. When you make something explicit, you unfold it. X means out. You unfold it. Now, he was extremely good at making things explicit so that they're always there, but then he would show what we're looking at, right? So he described the fact that if we're in a state of alienation from reality, we're cut off from God.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're cut off from God, we can't help but be miserable. It's like, imagine a metaphor of the sun. If I'm cut off from the sun, it's dark and it's miserable.
Right.
So it's not that, but in Western psychology, we take the darkness and the misery as the problem. But that's not the problem. The problem is that we're cut off from God. And you see, for Swami Dayananda, you know how his vision is there is only God? Have you noticed that we have an experience, that we have a life in being set apart and different and cut off from God?
Right.
That we have our own existence, as if we have our own being. Have you noticed that that's a fairly strong idea?
Yeah.
Okay. And like in our Western scriptures, they talk about the vine and the branch.
Right.
If the vine is cut off from the branch, if the branch is cut off from the vine, you can't help but be miserable. You wither. Right? And I went and saw him after this talk, and I said, Swamiji, you don't believe in pathology, do you? And he said, no, there's only order. In other words, given you're cut off from the light, you're going to be miserable and dark.
Yes.
So suddenly it was no longer personal. Does that make sense? I was my problem was being cut off from the presence of God.
Yes.
Okay, now once I got that, you have no idea what a relief that was. Yeah. It didn't mean that it didn't mean I was relieved from self-dissatisfaction from the front, but now I could look at that self-dissatisfaction in the right light. And because I could look at it in the right light, now there was a doorway to open it. Does that make sense?
Can I ask a segue question over here? Because you spoke about being cut off from God and all pathologies stemming from there. Yep. So I can see this working very well when it comes to pathologies that a relatively healthy person would experience. But let's say we have an extreme example of somebody with...
No, if someone's if someone's caught up in psychosis or schizophrenia or whatever, we're not talking about that. That's a different thing. Even Swami Dayananda says, it's not even beneficial for them to study Vedanta. It might make them worse.
So what would be the right solution for them to get them?
Well, no, I don't want to go into that because it would be psychotherapeutics. That there's applications for Dayananda's thing here. I want to deal with it, us as an individual. What he says was that emotional maturity has to be self-initiated.
Correct.
So we're looking only from the point of view of a person who goes, because they have the fourth striving, which is this longing for God, and they reach a point where their life isn't working,
right?
And they see that no matter what they do, the problem centered on myself is not there. We're only talking about people who can come to that point of recognition. A person who's psychotic or schizophrenic, and I hate those terms, by the way, will not come to the point that the problem is centered on them. They can't.
Right.
Maybe theoretically, but they can't.
I see. Makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So So what we're looking at is that throughout the day, because things happen that are contrary to my binding desires, I will be constantly thrown back into my self-dissatisfaction. Now, the fact of the matter is, and Swami Dayananda says, in response to this, the first response is you, and the second response is Ishvara. Have you heard him say that? Okay. Now, so what happens is, straight away, we tend to blame. Our response is blame. Okay, our response is blame. I'm upset because of something external to me.
Right.
Because of my psychology, or because of the other people, or because of the world, because of my situation. Right? Now, if it's true, Prashant, that my psychological solution or my psychological problem is external to me, that means that I can't help but feel that the solution's external to me.
Correct.
And so I'm going to get busy. I'm going to get busy about my psychological problems. I'm going to get psychologically busy about my psychological problems.
Right.
Right? So I'm going to engage my mind and my activity to do something about that object.
Yes.
Can't help it. Can't help it. Right? This was the story of my life. Right? Because I never knew what it was to remain without friction with my self-dissatisfaction. I didn't really know what that was until I met Swami Dayananda. Okay? Now.
Okay, can I ask a question on that process?
Yep.
Was this realization that you had in the presence of Pujya Swamiji gradual, or did it come very early on? Or was it like a...
Oh, no, it was gradual, because I struggled greatly to understand all this. Do you know what I mean? What would happen would be I'd get an understanding, and then I'd lose it. Then I'd ask him a question again. He'd answer it. Then I'd get it clear. And then it was back and forth, back and forth. I wasn't a smart type of person. It took me it took me a long time. He dragged me screaming and yelling to heaven. Okay, because I was resisting. You know, I didn't. Because we also resist the truth as well.
Right.
Because we want to preserve our separate identity from God, of course. So God is actually the God is in the presence of God, ourselves as personality disappears.
Yes.
Part of us doesn't like that. We're obsessed with preserving ourselves. See, so that, so there was a dialogue, Now, and bear in mind, in order to understand this, you're going to have to look at our previous talks. Otherwise, it's not going to make sense. I'm not going to cover it again, right? So what happened was that. So here you are. If we look at the structure of self-dissatisfaction, I hate being what I'm like. So you see these two things. So there's this inner split, and this part's fighting against that part, right? Now. And also what we know is that my heart and my mind is entirely involved with the world in order to deal with this self-dissatisfaction. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to use here, because I'm a Westerner and I'm from our Western tradition, I'm going to use a definition of prayer that I like from St. Thomas Aquinas. It's called prayer is the rising of our hearts and minds to God.
Beautiful.
Okay, the rising of our hearts and minds to God. Now, Swami Dayananda didn't use that term, but it meant the same, which I'll explain. So here I am. I often find myself kind of involved with the world in an effort to try and find my salvation and changing people, things in my mind.
Right.
Okay. So my heart and mind is completely absorbed in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, wouldn't it be great to be able to know the approach where we can disengage from that so that our hearts and mind can be reclaimed?
Yes.
All right. Now, we can't do this without prayer. Now, this is really important because we live in a very secular world now. Have you noticed that?
Unfortunately.
Right? But it's aggressive. You see, 40 years ago, it wasn't aggressive.
Yeah.
It's now aggressively secular. Like when you look at, and I'm not criticizing the Buddhist tradition, but the Buddhist tradition as experienced in the West is a form of atheistic humanism. They hate the idea of God.
Yeah.
They hate the idea of any transcendence. It's all just simply awareness and all of this stuff, it just, okay, well, I'm not going to go into that, but the Vedic vision of God that Swami Dayananda unfolded, it's got nothing to do with that stuff. Okay? So we're talking about prayer, and what he said about prayer was no technique can replace prayer.
Right.
Now, isn't that interesting? No technique. So in other words, prayer is the doorway. Without prayer, we can't disengage. Our hearts and minds are caught up.
Right.
And you as a person are helpless before that caught upness. Right? And also we have an unbelievably psychological aversion to remaining in our helplessness. But but here's the problem, Prashant. The truth is we are helpless for ourselves. So in actual fact, the perception of our helplessness is grace.
Yes.
It's the light of Ishvara revealing to us our existential condition. It's not negative.
So BG,
It's the truth. What?
Here, when you are referring to prayer, it's more of an attitude than an action, right?
It's what Swami Dayananda calls, yes. I'll go into the prayer. He was very big on the prayerful attitude.
Okay.
So it's a way of being that is prayerful.
Right.
Now, that implicitly means that that when you're prayerful, your heart and mind is no longer glued to the world in the samsaric stupidity of trying to find happiness where it's not.
Right.
But the basis of this prayerfulness is the full recognition of our helplessness, utter and complete.
Right.
Now, let's not confuse orders. I don't mean helplessness in terms of Dharma.
Yeah.
I'm talking about helplessness in terms of what I am being.
Correct.
Okay, so we need to know that. Now, and without prayer, we will not be able to remain, Dayananda's thing on sameness, remaining, that yoga is sameness. Okay, we can't, without an understanding of God, there can be no sameness, because what happens is someone says something, I feel this. Someone says something else, I feel that.
Right.
If I get this, I don't. We're chopping and changing.
Yes.
There's no. He says that you're living an emotional yo-yo life. That's how he referred to it. Okay. Now, so here I am, with the understanding that there's nothing wrong. You see, he never used right and wrong. He never ever called the universe good or bad. You know that? He never used those terms, good or bad,
Yes.
which is really strange for us with the Christian Judaic tradition.
Yeah.
He never used evil or good.
Yeah.
He only used right and wrong.
Yeah.
Now, even in our Western scriptures, the knowledge of right and wrong, that casts you out of the Garden of Eden. But the thing is that he never used right and wrong. So my condition is, even if I'm miserable, is he would never say, oh, it's bad. He would say it's just the outworking of laws.
Yeah.
He would never. So that was a great relief, which we've talked about in previous talks, so referred them to that. Okay, so here I am. You say something to me that I hate. You say, Bede, you're a bit of an idiot, really, and look at your messed up life, okay. And I'm feeling crushed. Right? I'm feeling crushed, right? Now, when I'm helpless, now I'm feeling crushed. It's either going to be this. I blame you and therefore I attack you in certain ways. I get busy mentally and I get busy activity-wise directed towards you to try and change you so I can feel good in myself. You see how that's one option?
Yeah.
Right? But he said the basis of self-acceptance is the understanding of Ishvara. Can you imagine that? The basis of self-acceptance. Now, what do we mean by self-acceptance? Do we mean some glowy, I'm feeling happy about myself? I'm feeling good about myself? Absolutely not. And it's not the Western way of self-acceptance. I look at myself as an object and I go, oh, yeah, I like that. Okay, I accept the fact that I've got problems. Nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
Self-acceptance is being able to remain truthfully and firmly with myself as I am without resistance. Right? Without resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is really interesting because self-dissatisfaction is resistance. I hate being what I'm like. So you see the resistance?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this is incredible, right? So what happens is, here I am, you've said or done something I don't like, or my conditions are in a way that I don't like, or my thoughts and feelings are a way that I don't like, and I'm suffering and I hate it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? As I said before, when I hate it, I get busy because I don't want to remain with myself. I don't want to remain helplessly with myself as I am, do I?
Mm.
Do you see the psychological aversion to that?
Mm.
But what Swami Dayananda is presenting here is this helplessness is the doorway to psychological, acknowledging our helplessness and remaining with ourselves like that. Here I am, like this. Okay. So I come to God exactly as I am because that's what I am.
Right.
At the moment, I'm upset. See, people get into spiritual idealism. You know, Swami Dayananda, he's got this beautiful teaching on idealism. He says it's the basis causes of bitterness.
Yeah.
It's the cause of bitterness. So here I am. I might have all these spiritual ideas. I mustn't be judgmental. I mustn't be angry. I mustn't be envious. I mustn't be this, that, and the other thing. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Now, from the Christian Judeo perspective, all of that's bad.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, where Dayananda was, the only thing that's right or wrong is conduct, not the state of being. That's just simply the result of laws. Given your background, given your psychological structure, bang, can't be any other way. Mm-hmm. And this is what he means by accepting. When we understand this, we're not going to try and do something about the laws, are we? Mm-hmm. Okay? Now, mind you, there's another law too, by the way, that when you become aware of the presence of Ishvara, you get transformed as an individual. Mm-hmm. That's also a law. You're lifted out of your identification with your psychology. Right. When you're resting in the presence of God. That's a rule. Yeah. We can rely on that. Now, so here I am. So I'm like this, right? Now, so instead of depending on the world and my functions to try and fix myself up, mm-hmm. because I understand my complete and utter helplessness and I understand the location of the problem, which we've talked about before, because it's very important. If I don't understand that the location of my problem is me, mm-hmm. then I'm going to obsessively change it. So straight away, when you're remaining with yourself as you are, you're going to start to get quiet, right. Because you're no longer revving up the thinking and the doing to try and do something. Yeah. Okay? So what happens is, you are remaining with yourself, and to talk in religious language, what we do is the full acknowledgement. I'm like this. Yeah, I'm completely. I'm angry. I can say, well, I shouldn't be judgmental. But what if I am judgmental? Yeah. Well, okay, that's the truth. Now, for Swami Dayananda, the whole thing is to be alive to facts, not to be good. Not to be good. Vedanta is cognitive. It's to be alive to what's here. So here I am, I'm like this. So what happens is I understand that under the sway of becoming, I understand that that's the road to perdition. Right? But under the sway of being, and in Vedanta, being and God are synonymous. Right. Under the sway of being, that's my salvation. I come under a different sway. Does that make sense? So here I am. And so I become completely inactive as personality in my helplessness. How about that? So in the recognition of helplessness, I turn off myself as personality. Okay? So what's happening is I'm being resolved into Ishvara. But notice that even the understanding that I'm helplessness is a gift from God. Yes. It's not my spiritual understanding. Oh, I've really got this now. I'm fantastic. Yeah. None of that nonsense, right? Because Swami Dayananda has a very interesting, what I would call a senior principle.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is given. Everything, not just some things. So wisdom is given. It's not mine. In our Western tradition, we used to have the thing that no one would ever say that they're wise. They were lovers of wisdom. Philosophy was lovers of wisdom because they understood that wisdom was an attribute of God.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, but from what we understand with the means of knowledge, wisdom is the presence of God obtaining in me as a way of seeing, but it's given.
Mm-hmm.
It's nothing to do. There's no spiritual vanity with this. It's given. So here I am, this understanding of helplessness that I'm actually Ishvara is bringing me to the point of helplessness. So the truth of the matter is I am helpless.
Right.
Am I helpless before old age and sickness and death, Prashant? Yeah, I might have psychological reactions about that. But Swami Dayananda said, that's fine too. Just come with your psychological reactions of helplessness and anger and upset about that.
Yeah.
Because he says that's the order too.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're talking about is a complete free-for-all, unrestrained authenticity. Right? This is so important. Do you know what I mean? And this has got nothing to do with, I'm going to be mindful. But the thing is that we're embraced by the light of Ishvara, and it's only in that light do we see ourselves. It's not my light. I'm not going to cultivate awareness for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Because the awareness belongs to God.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to do that. It's a fundamental difference. I don't mean to be critical of that tradition. And I'm not saying that all of them, but the way it's been marketed and the way it's talked about in the West now is just unbelievable. And it's godless. It really is godless.
So for our benefit, because contrast would really help drill in the point.
Okay.
What do you see lacking in this whole Western concept of mindfulness that they've somehow stolen from the Indic traditions, but they've customized it for the West? So what do you see lacking in that?
Well, what's lacking is that, first of all, everything is given. So the light of awareness, is it mine or is it just abidingly present?
Right.
So if I think that I can practice awareness, right,
Mm-hmm.
I can find myself being under the light of awareness. Mm-hmm. And in that light, I see clearly, but it's not my light.
Right.
But if I think that I can cultivate awareness and it's mine, right, it is a form of egoism, and it cuts me off from the love of God. Right. You see, they're atheistic.
Right.
They hate. Now, I understand with the terrible, some of the terrible things within the Christian tradition and the violence and the whole wrath of God thing, which is a complete slander against what God is. Right. The Vedic vision doesn't suffer from that pathology.
Correct.
Do you know what I mean? So, but I mean, one of the early fathers, and they never made him a saint because he had two ideas, right? His name was Origen. Mm-hmm. That eventually everyone is brought back to God, mm-hmm. because nothing can withstand the love of God, the benevolence of God drawing humanity to itself. Mm-hmm. So they didn't like that, and also that Jesus wasn't the Son of God; he was a Son of God. Mm-hmm. So they, of course, couldn't have that. And we know what the worship of one person, if you know what I mean, the exclusivity and the violence of the youth, with all of that. We won't go into that. But so we're talking about the Vedic vision of God, which is all inclusive. Mm-hmm. So I don't have, to put it in Aquinas' terms, I don't have my own be. Right. Okay, and the way Dayananda would put it, the clay pot depends upon entirely for its being from the clay. Right. Okay, it doesn't have it. It might imagine it has its own be. There's no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so getting back to here I am. I'm like this. I'm like this right now. But the wonderful thing is, because we understand that the material cause of the universe is God, every aspect of that experience, the form that experience is taking, the presence of God is not away from it. In fact, that's precisely where we encounter the presence of God, right here, right now, as I am.
Yeah.
It's precisely where I meet God. Isn't that magnificent? It's precisely where I recognize I'm embraced by the presence of God. Isn't this it's extraordinary, really? Yeah. So what happens is, so here I am. Now, if I have an understanding of God, now, there are a lot of people who, especially because of the effects of Zen, because, particularly in the West, where they love this godless thing, you see, they don't like metaphor, religious metaphor. They hate it, right? But the fact of the matter is, if you were to put it in religious language, is that you are just simply arriving as you are, and you're placing yourself as you are in God's hands.
Yes.
Now, I know God hasn't got hands, but I am symbolically representing it because that symbolism can convey meaning,
Right.
an existential meaning, right? I'm not having an anthropomorphic view of God, but I'm using, does that make sense? It's a very useful, God is father, mother, all of that sort of stuff that people kind of object to. Me as an individual who am a space-time bound being, those things communicate to me.
Yes.
Does that make sense? So we need that. So quite simply, here I am. I'm angry like this. I'm judgmental. I'm furious. I don't know what to do about myself. Are you familiar with that kind of thing?
Yeah.
We can be caught in that. But with this understanding of God, the basis of self-acceptance is the understanding of Ishvara. So when self-acceptance is born in me, because it's not mine, given, when it's born in me, that self-dissatisfaction, that friction, I hate being what I'm like, ceases to be present.
Yeah.
Because I'm like this, and I'm just going to, as this, I'm going to relax. I'm going to wait. Okay, I'm just simply going to wait. Right? Now, what happens then is, notice how I'm no longer struggling with it. I'm no longer a samsari. I'm now being.
Yes.
I'm still caught in the misery. It's fine. Okay? But I, as ego, am not trying to fix the ego.
Yes.
Dionanda says the ego can't fix the ego. So I'm completely and utterly depending on the action of God's presence in my life. And God's presence appreciated is the transformative factor, nothing else. Right? Nothing else. Every other thing is a substitute, is becoming. I'm going to be busy doing things. But you also notice that right here now is my mind and my heart are here now. I'm available.
Yeah.
Now, what happens is, so I wait. I'm remaining the same. That's what yoga is. I'm remaining the same in the front of myself. And then what happens is, you are drawn into the very heart of Ishvara. You're drawn. Dayananda's metaphorical language, but I don't mind metaphorical language because I'm at times, I'm not pretentious. These Neo-Ed Whitens, you're only consciousness and all this nonsense. Right?
Yeah.
So what happens is you find yourself being drawn into the lap of Ishvara.
Yeah.
And you're drawn into an acceptance.
Yeah.
That is born out of the understanding of, it's not a psychological function. I'm going to be accepting. It's a state of being which is being accepting.
Mm-hmm.
But he says it's born out of our understanding of God. It's not born out of my psychology.
Right.
Now, what's really interesting is the other thing that he says that is fundamental to the human being. We have a tremendous distrust. Now, what happens is, as we're drawn into the heart of Ishvara, into the lap of Ishvara,
Yeah.
which, by the way, the heart of Ishvara and our heart are one and the same. We know that. We know that. That appointment with ourselves is the appointment with God, because for Vedanta, the life, light, and fullness that is God is our real life.
Yeah.
Right? And it helps to know that. So here I am, I'm drawn, and as I'm drawn in, I find myself being trusting. But it's the presence of God obtaining in me as an attitude. Does that make sense? It's not me. You know, this whole, and if, in contrast to this, to my little petty efforts of trying to be mindful and thinking this is so good.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
So, BG, can I ask a question there? This is
Yep.
kind of ties into what you said earlier.
Yeah.
You mentioned that Pujya Swamiji used to speak in metaphors in very colorful, beautiful language to draw you into a certain attitude. And he also spoke about how these neo-Adventins just very dryly, it's a cut and dry statement that you are Brahman, or, you know, I'm Brahman,
Yep.
I'm consciousness. So
Yep.
I've always wondered this, or at least I'm wondering about it now. We know that you are Brahman, Tattvamasi, all of these Mahavakyas are facts. And
Yes.
yet at the same time, just as you say, I don't feel myself very easily drawn through just a dry statement. I would rather prefer a metaphor that is able to, you know, draw me completely into it. So what?
Of course you are, because that's the, first of all, the psychological pain of alienation from God, right, can only be resolved. First of all, we appreciate Brahman as the in this manifest universe, in the world of our experience.
Yes.
So we can come into relationship with Ishvara. We don't come into relation to Brahman.
Correct.
Right? And also, I don't know what this is, but if I resolve then my individuality in the totality that's God, so that there's not God relating to me or me relating to God. There's no place where God ends and I begin, right? That's resolution of human egoism entirely. It would never be something like, oh, I am so cool now. You know, it's just ridiculous. So the difference is that we're dealing here, first of all, we have to come to a knowledge of that before we know we're that.
Right.
Right. And so this whole thing of, to use a Kantian term, knowing God in itself obviously means there's no duality, because otherwise I'll be knowing God as an object.
Right.
And Vedantic metaphysics is very clear on that, and is very good, because there's no metaphysics like that that's clear like that in the world, except for I don't think. It's just so clear. Yeah. So we can't know God in itself, because the only way we could, it's only when we are being the life, light, and fullness that is God, from personality, that's a lie. Right. That is a lie. And then also there's this antagonism to God. And Swami Dayananda says praying is very hard because the ego doesn't like it. Yeah. Now you think about it, when I'm praying, right? I come to God and I go, look, please help me. I just don't know what to do about myself. I'm stuffed up. I'm talking, agreed?
Yes.
I'm not talking to change God. I don't need to change God's nature. Do you know what I mean? He's wisdom. God is wisdom, compassion, and self. I don't have to worry about that. Right. But when I acknowledge that and I'm articulating it, do you see how in that very prayer is an acknowledgement of helplessness? Yeah. Total dependence on God, because you can't depend on anything in the world, actually. Right. Does that make sense? So prayer, you know, I pray as an individual. Well, what did he do? And Neo Whiten would say, oh, yeah, but you're being dualistic. You know, you're being dualistic because you're praying to something. I'm not praying to an object other than myself, by the way. Because I don't believe that. I believe that the life and light and fullness that is God is my life. Right. And that's what I'm heading with. So I'm not praying to God as an object away from me, but I'm praying as an individual. Yeah. But that is an articulation of my existential condition of pure helplessness. Yes. So prayer is a wonderful thing. It's without prayer, without this full acknowledgement of our total and utter dependence on God, there is no psychological transformation. I can't help but slip into becoming. My mind and heart are caught in the world. do you notice that as I appreciate the fact that I'm embraced by the presence of Ishvara and I relax into that, you notice how my heart and mind are lifted out of identification and drawn into the very lap of Ishvara.
You see that, yes.
And you see how this is a psychological transformation?
It is, yeah.
Because I'm no longer busy with my mind. When I take Western people through this who've never studied Vedanta, it's actually sometimes easier to teach them than someone who's studied a lot of Vedanta.
Correct.
Because what happens is that because we have an understanding of God, because we understand these material cause of the universe, which means that he is not away from any aspect of my experience.
Yes.
No matter what form my experience is in, that is precisely where I encounter God.
Right.
And then with the self-acceptance, I remain accepting in my condition. I just remain accepting because I can just leave that in God's hands.
Yeah.
Now, this is what happens. This is the psychological transformation. First of all, I will notice, and I am made to become composed. See, when I'm together, no friction. Compose in Latin means compose, put together. I'm together. Okay, I'm together. So what happens is there's a composure, a relaxation that comes about.
Yes.
But it has no reason. Because you're still the person that you've always been, Prashant. You've insulted me and everything else. That hasn't changed. But in the face of that experience, I am being composed because I'm not. What happens is I take away the power in prayer. The power for you to hurt me is not there. So the world is not giving me psychological happiness or taking psychological happiness away in prayer.
Yeah.
In prayerfulness. Are we tracking here?
Yeah.
So the first thing that we notice that when we're just what Swami Dayananda calls resting in the lap of Ishvara, it doesn't mean that you like what's happened. But you're peaceful. In our Western scriptures, we refer to that peace which surpasseth understanding.
Okay.
It's not an object we can think about because we're being the peace. Yeah. That's the whole thing about Vedanta. It's not dualistic. I am being the peace.
Yes.
It's not like I'm having peace. Right? So this peace that is born out of our understanding, it's highly desirable. It is what St. Thomas Aquinas would call the good. It is the good.
Yeah.
Only God is good. But there's no experience that's good. I might think it's the good, but that's a misdirection.
True.
Right? So first of all, so we understand that we're composed.
Yeah.
Secondly, we're psychologically free because I'm no longer being determined by what's happened, yes, by the presence of objects. That's what freedom really is. If I can say as much as I like, oh yes, I've got moksha or any of this nonsense, right? But moksha is being free while living, being free. So we're being the freedom.
Right.
It's a way of being again. It's God obtaining in us as a way of being.
Yes.
Right? And lastly, now this is the most important one. As we're drawn into Ishvara's lap, as we appreciate the fact that, because we're always in Ishvara's lap, actually, we're just dreaming that we're not, right? That's actually the truth. The clay pot can never get away from the clay, no matter how much you try. So the fact of the matter is that for Swami Dayananda, all of these different psychological categories, depression, antagonism, anger, grief, sad, all of these things, all that boredom, emptiness, all of these things, he puts under one basket: self-dissatisfaction, centered on us, self-dissatisfaction. But when I'm drawn in, and this is not like one day I'm going to know God. I'm talking about right here, right now, as I am, I remain with myself. And what happens is, as I'm drawn into the heart of Ishvara or into Ishvara's lap, it doesn't matter what metaphoric language you talk about. You find yourself, the self-dissatisfaction, because you're at home with yourself. You're at home with yourself, but we're only at home with ourselves when we're home in God. Does that make sense?
True. Yes.
There's no other place. Now, there's a prayer that I read years ago that when I was about 18, and because I went, oh God, that's me, right? And it was, "Thou hast made us for yourself, O Lord, and we are restless until we rest in thee."
Beautiful.
And I knew I was restless. And that's why when I first read Swami Dayananda's thing about being relapsed in the lap of Ishvara, I didn't know what that meant. I thought, but that would be good. Oh, God, I'd love to know about that. That's why I went to India to learn about that, actually. Because I knew that if I could resolve all the different forms of self-dissatisfaction, but I didn't quite know what that meant. I had to get in front of it. I really had to get, and I was a slow learner, right? And I've been learning about this one fact that we're talking about today for the last 5 years.
Right.
This one fact. Have you ever heard of that saying from the Upanishads, knowing that one thing, everything is well known?
Yeah.
Well, the fact of the matter is that when you understand that all of these different things, once you understand God in Swami Dayananda's sense, all the different diverse forms of pathology are as well known.
Yes.
They're known to be just simply self-dissatisfaction. You don't have to do a degree or you just know what it is. It's, I'm cut off from God. As soon as I understand my problem is not my wife, I'm cut off from God, what do? I find myself being turned towards God, don't I?
Yeah.
Now, the difference is because we understand grace, we don't turn, we are turned. So the very fact that wisdom obtains in me, I'm the location of the problem. So you listen to a person like Swami Dayananda and you really see that you're the location of the problem. That wisdom obtaining in you is what turns you to God. You don't turn yourself to God. You're not interested in God. You're interested in yourself. So it's, yep.
So, Meiji, this is like raising an old philosophical conundrum, right? It's like a chicken or egg problem. That are your actions causing, certain events to take place, or are certain events causing, your further actions in that direction? So it's kind of like, are you being turned, or are you initiating that turning process, or have you initiated at some point in the past, which is coming to you as this grace from Ishvara? So like, how do you?
Okay. Okay. So now I'll give you. Now I may not be right on this, but I'll give you my think on this. Can I tell you that? Okay. All right. So the first of all thing is that we mustn't confuse orders. Right. So we know even in our Western scriptures, what you sow, you'll reap. So in the level of Dharma, that's why Dharma is so important. Right. Dharma is reformation of our character, our conduct. Right. Very important. That's our job. Mm-hmm. That's our job. There's no doubt about the fact that that's our job, right? That's not God's job. But everything's given. The very fact that that the voice of Dharma speaks to me about what's right and wrong, and I can conform my acts to it. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The very fact that because there's an inward satisfaction, because it keeps me in harmony with life. Do you know what I mean? And I can understand and I can recognize that that's truly valuable. Even that recognition is still God, right? But I have to be responsible as an individual.
Yes.
Right? So, because if you see life do it, God, I'll leave it all into God. Right? That's ridiculous.
Correct.
We have to satisfy the demands of the third striving. Right? We have a striving to be loving and to be caring. Right. We conform our actions. But I'm talking about this here is because what I'm talking about here is the level of being, because it's the fourth striving to the absolute truth to God, right? This requires a different thing. So if we don't confuse the orders, it's not a problem. Now it's true. If I'm living a life of Dharma, and because I come into harmony with life, and my mind becomes clearer, and I'm no longer I'm relatively free of friction, it gives a space for this understanding. Does that make sense?
Correct.
Right? However, sometimes people have a misunderstanding who don't live that much of it. Sometimes the grace of God penetrates through for whatever reason.
Correct. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So, but do you see the difference between the orders?
Yeah.
The Dharmic order, which is, as you sow, you're going to reap.
Right.
We need to know that, because we get into serious trouble if we violate that one.
Exactly.
Right? Okay. However, what Swami Dayananda says, this whole process of karma yoga is first of all the neutralization of binding desires, and the discovery of a contemplative disposition. Mm-hmm. In other words, it's such a wonderful thing, really, sometimes just sitting quietly with yourself with this understanding, just simply being prayerful. Mm-hmm. for no reason. You're not getting anything. You're not making money. You're not getting accepted for what. But you're just simply resting and being.
Right.
But that doesn't happen. But we have to resolve the psychological misery for that to really start to be settled in us, because the psychological misery gives fuel to the compulsiveness of the binding desire.
Right.
Right. So if I'm on a daily basis, in the practice of karma yoga, every time I notice that I'm upset, every time I notice that I've fallen away from the lap of Ishvara, that's an instruction to come back to God.
Correct.
To become completely dependent on the action of his very presence, which we call the presence of God and grace are not different.
Right.
Okay, so grace is not, and the thing too is that this is, we talk about earning grace. Do you know what I mean? We don't earn it like a barter commercial. It's not in a commercial arrangement. But if I don't understand and I don't commit myself to living a life of karma yoga, in other words, being rigorously tough with myself, it's not my wife that is upsetting me. It's me who's upset.
Yeah.
It's not my circumstances. It's me. It's not my thoughts and feelings that are upsetting me. It's me. I am cut off from God at the moment. If I don't commit to a life of karma yoga and commit to living that vision, right, and being tough on myself and not making excuses, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Then what happens is I'm cutting myself off from being under the sway of the grace.
Yes.
Right. So, but we all understand that it's all given. Right. Even the fact of me wanting and longing for God, and because in the context of this longing for God, when you meet someone like Swami Dayananda, it's only in that context do you see you have a cognition of the value that he's talking about, because you'll only see the value of it in the context of that longing for God.
Right.
You won't, if you're under the sway of a binding desire where you want to be liked and admired, and Swami Dayananda says you need a complete and utter full recognition of your helplessness, you're not going to be interested in that.
Correct.
You see, because cognition only occurs within the context, you see. This is what's so good about Vedic psychology as he unfolded. You got 4 strivings, and they cover the entire range of human beings,
Right.
that we're moved. And that's what he meant by emotional maturity. When I am moved to want what God wants, then I'm wanting to be with God.
Yes.
That wanting for me, me wanting to be prayerful is given to me by God. But it's not like the Christian Judaic thing. God's ordering you to do stuff, otherwise he's going to fry you. Right? And what happens is God's will becomes your will in you.
Right.
It's not dualistic for the Vedantins.
No, yes.
You see what I mean? So just to kind of so what we're looking at here is a psychological transformation that we don't produce. It's grace. But it doesn't, but in order for us to be available to it, we have to have a spiritual understanding.
Yeah.
Now, an understanding in Vedanta is a way of seeing that obtains in us. So it's the presence of God obtaining in us as a way of seeing. So when I suddenly go, I'm suffering now, this means I'm cut off from God. Do you see that very way of seeing, which is my way of seeing, has been given to me from Swami Dayananda, the teaching.
Right.
But he was given that, ultimately says the ultimate teacher is God, Ishvara. So it's God in the beginning, God in the middle, and God at the end. Do you mean? And this is, see, from my point of view, and I'm a Westerner, right? And I looked at Swami, I was interested in his psychology in the sense of every factor that will bring about this psychological transformation. Not because I was interested in psychology, because I was just incredibly suffering. That's all I was interested in it for, right? I wasn't that holy. I didn't really have any noble motives. It just, I was desperate. So, but when all of this is given, does that make sense? And So what happens is, in this world of darkness, of ignorance about what unhappiness is, where do we find what is truly good, all of this stuff, normally human beings are caught in the level of thinking and physiological action and emotions, right? It is only the opening up in us of wisdom. And that, I'm not saying it doesn't occur without a teaching tradition, but because Swami Dayananda brought a teaching tradition, because there has been different individuals, even within our Western tradition, who's obviously seen, like, St. Augustine said, God is closer to us than we are to ourselves. We're not saying that spiritual understanding doesn't obtain. But what was remarkable about him is he brings a teaching tradition, which is the Vedic vision of God, actually.
Yeah.
For him, moksha is the understanding there is only God.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if we paraphrase in English what we mean by Twatwamasi, is that being which everything is, you are.
Correct.
And so, with this understanding, so we understand that the very fact that I'm not going to one day be walking down the road and go, oh my goodness, the presence of the given is the presence of the giver.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. So that the very fact that vision can come in and obtain in me by me listening to a teacher like Swami Dayananda is truly remarkable. We don't have a teaching tradition in the West.
Yes.
So we don't have a methodology, if you like, where we listen to someone who's unfolding a vision, who's already in the vision, and because they're in the vision, then that vision comes alive in you. We don't have that.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? And that is what's unique to Vedanta. That's what the Buddhists haven't. I can practice being mindful as much as I like, but yet I'm still rabidly atheistic. I hate the idea of God, and a lot of them do, by the way. But that hatred for God is, what the psychological basis of that is, Prashant?
No.
It's the resistance, because in the presence of God, what happens to me with my unique specialness and my life apart from God?
Right. Everybody wants to be a unicorn, basically.
That's exactly right. And that very thing is a movement away from God, and it's trying to maintain and preserve a separate sense of identity from God, and we're actually, as personality, we're afraid of God.
So you bring up a very interesting thesis, by the way, which is that the rise of mindfulness is directly correspondent to the rise of the leftism in the West. So Marxism
yeah.
Yeah, so they need to go together.
Yeah, because you've got what you call now engaged Buddhism,
Right?
Which basically is, it's a little bit of this all night we're going to change the world.
Yeah.
And then there's this virtuous hatred, right? Our own self-hatred projected onto others, right? Because the fact of the matter is, the problem of the world needs to be solved as it exists in me. And the problem of the world is this becoming, the seeking happiness where it's not.
Right.
Living a godless life, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make? And so when we look at it when we look at this whole problem from the Vedic vision of God, it becomes clear the era.
Yes.
Do you see what I mean? But what's wonderful, where you guys are really lucky, is that you have a teaching tradition that enables people to look at every facet of their life in the right light. Yeah. But what's interesting is it's not dualistic. You see, because I was brought up in the West, I was caught up in God's over there and me here. This idea of God obtaining in me as wisdom itself, as my wisdom, as my way of seeing. There's nothing. I haven't seen anything like this. It doesn't exist anywhere else. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's not saying that God is not active in people's lives who are not Hindu. Do you know what I mean? But there's a tremendous gift in Swami Dayananda's teaching of God. And I really strongly suggest that people really start reading his basic books I ponder his basic books all the time. I read them all of the time. I still read them. I still think about them. And it always bears tremendous fruit. He was an extraordinary teacher because he could communicate to me, a Western person like me, who's not really religious that much, if you know what I mean, right? But he could convey to me the Vedic vision of God in a way that was meaningful, that I didn't have to deny my culture. Does that make sense? Because I don't think like Indians, right? But he was truly the universal teacher. And he has the solution for us Westerners who live in a culture where the religious forms have completely collapsed.
Right.
Does that make sense? And we're left with this existential vacuum of angst. We can't adopt other cultures because it's too hard, right? It's not feasible. But the Vedic vision of God embraces every person, no matter what culture, no matter what religion, no matter what. It doesn't deny, and it doesn't need to, because if you're resting in the lap of Ishvara and you're living that way of being in the world where you're composed, free, and at home, then that is God's presence in the world as a way of being. And when you met someone like Swami Dayananda, you met God's presence in the form of a human being.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? So is there anything you would like to, anything I haven't covered, or I just tried to want to convey this beautiful teaching because I think it needs a lot more attention than it's given.
I think so as well, and that's why we are grateful for this continued series. And I think you've covered this topic very beautifully, and everything is seamlessly tied into our previous discussions as well. So thank you so much. Every time I listen to you, things are busy for you and things are busy for me, but I still feel that we need to make more time for these conversations because it's so beneficial to me personally, and I'm sure to all of the viewers as well. So maybe next time around, what we could try is, because you often alluded to your experience in India and your, of course, meeting Swamini Atma Prakashananda ji in UK, things like that. Maybe we could walk through your journey just as somebody who's introduced to the teaching, and it could be more
Okay.
interview style of like understanding where you came from and where you ended up.
Okay. And can I just end off with a thought? You know, the fourth striving is the striving or the longing. It manifests us as a longing for God, longing for the absolute, longing for something that it doesn't shift and change and all of this stuff, right? The only thing that satisfies that longing is the presence of God itself. Nothing. There's nothing else that will do it. We will never be happy except we can't avoid the issue of God.
Right.
But with the Vedic vision of God, it's so clear, and what it does is it opens up the wisdom that enables us to go back home. And we're only at home in God. We're not at home in this world. We can never be at home in this world. We're a stranger in a strange land. So this whole journey back, this is the essential fruit of the Vedantic teaching. And remember, when you think about this, Swami Dayananda said there is no karma yoga without Ishvara.
Right.
That's why I sometimes think, of this corporate, karma yoga, Bhagavad Gita and the corporate thing. I'm not that crazy about it.
Yeah, neither am I.
Okay.
That's beautiful.
All right.
And thank you so much once again. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prashant. God bless. Bye-bye.